Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. In this two-part series, we're honored to sit down with Bobby Swartz to discuss his remarkable aviation career. Bobby's military aviation story began with Naval Aviation Flight training from 2009 to 2011. In 2012, he completed the MV-22B Initial Pilot Qualification and underwent rigorous flight training, laying the foundation for a career filled with notable achievements. Bobby's career trajectory led him through various impactful roles within the Marine Corps, showcasing expertise in flight leadership at every step. He initially served as a ground safety officer at VMM-561 in Miramar and VMM-265 in Okinawa, Japan, while continuing to learn the Osprey. His dedication to safety and excellence has been a constant thread throughout his entire career. The majority of Bobby's career was spent at VMM-161 in San Diego at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, where he held key positions such as Director of Safety and Standardization and Aviation Safety Officer while attaining Night Systems Instructor and Flight Lead designations in the Osprey. Bobby's dedication and excellence led him to Washington, D.C., where he was assigned to the prestigious Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, aka HMX-1, which is in charge of transportation of the U.S. President, presidential staff, and dignitaries worldwide. Since leaving active duty in 2021, Bobby's earned the title of First Officer at a major U.S. airline, flying the 737, and continues to serve the United States as a Marine Corps reservist flying the Osprey out of Miramar. Thank you to our sponsors, Precision Aviation Group, Metro Aviation, and Astronautics Corporation of America. Cheers.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, John Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
They're advising code 4 on the stop.
You talked a little bit about hovering in the VTOL mode. Can you talk about kind of some of the dynamics of hovering that machine versus a helicopter and what you're feeling with it?
Yeah. So the different control laws, right? That was one of the things in the simulator training and everything that you start to you have to teach your brain of what inputs result in what. So in a hover, in a stable hover, the nacelles would typically be stable. We're not moving those right there. So it's normal using the cyclic for drift. And then we call it the TCL instead of so the thrust control lever, similar to what the collective does in a helicopter. It's really, we don't have to do much with the rudder pedals, nearly what I had to do in that Jet Ranger. So it's pretty stable in the yaw axis. It's pretty stable up and down with thrust control lever inputs. And then just your normal cyclic drift, combination of crew chiefs calling drift, and then what you can scan on that page that we're watching. So very stable in a hover. It does have some hover coupled modes that we can use. Basically turn an autopilot on that it can self couple to basically an INS point. So that if you were going to do it for a really long time, or we've used it sometimes during training for fast rope or rappelling ops, you can give those guys a really stable platform if you couple it. And this takes a little fun of the game out of it for us, but maybe for the customer, it gives them a little bit more confidence that they've got a stable rope to go down. But yeah, overall very stable. And then the conversion mode flying, the differences I would say there is that we start to use the thumb wheel. The angle of the nacelles is what actually changes your speeds, your airspeed. So it's a very level deck flying. I remember a little bit from the Jet Ranger, but it was some forward cyclic and collective, to start climbing, accelerating. For us, it's really just the thrust control lever and then the thumb wheel, using some forward thumb wheel to adjust your lift vector. So a little bit difference there.
That's cool. Yeah. All the stuff you're describing sounds awesome. Something that, it's a bucket list thing for me to see in person and whether it's a simulator or whatnot, but that is a bucket list thing. You talked about operating out of Miramar. We used to live in Mira Mesa, so right next to Miramar, and actually went to the police academy was right next door. And I remember living there when you guys would go over or any of the helicopters. From time to time, every glass in our cabinet would shake, and it sounds like they're going to fall out of the cabinet.
That's a sound of freedom.
Yeah,
That's right.
For sure. It was really cool living there near all that stuff, So can you talk about your experience operating out of Miramar and kind of living in San Diego and how you like that?
I would think most Marine pilots would tend to agree with me that Miramar is kind of the crown jewel of where you're trying to get orders to. It used to be a Navy jet base back in the 90s, I think. And the Marine Corps still, we can't really figure out how they gave it to us, right? We normally get the leftover, the 29 Palms and those kinds of bases, but it still has the history. It's got the history of the Top Gun movie. You're close to the San Diego beaches. You're close to downtown. So yeah, I think you wouldn't find very many Marine pilots that would say they didn't want to get orders there. So definitely a great place to fly. We do a lot of our training over the mountains towards El Centro. So you get the great desert weather, provided great training opportunities. And then, at times, I know Tony sees the fog and the clouds rolling in. A lot of times we'd get surprised by a fog bank coming in late at night. But really, the base is a great location in SoCal. A lot of training opportunities, co-located with a very military-friendly town. Off and on, I was there for the most part of 5 years, a little bit before my time in Japan, and then 4 years between deployments after that. But yeah, definitely a great city to get stationed in, and a lot of great memories in San Diego.
That's awesome.
But you think of the airspace in San Diego, there's a lot of different airspaces down there between the Bravos and the Deltas and the Charlies. Well, I don't know. Is there any Charlies? It's just Bravos and Deltas, yeah?
Yeah, just the Bravos and Deltas. And I don't know, with Miramar, did you end up down in Lindbergh's airspace much? Did you guys train at North Island? Did you find yourself down there much?
Yeah, we'd cruise the beach with some extra time and go do the bay transition and stuff like that. We'd normally only talk to them, crossing the beach line because they're so busy with that single runway. But we'd sneak down to North Island. Guys like to do that for a sunset run on a Friday or something maybe. But yeah, we definitely got exposure to a lot of complicated airspace.
It's complicated and it changes quick. There's not a whole lot of room between some of these different airspaces. So I always love flying down there, but you got to be on your toes and you got to know what's what down there. You can't just kind of willy-nilly fly in there and try and figure it out on the go. But going to some of your best memories flying that thing. You've had a lot of different experiences and done a lot of cool stuff. And maybe the sunset flight's one of those things. What's one of the best experiences or memories you have flying the Osprey?
There's so many, right? And when I was kind of prepping for this, I was trying to think of some different times. And when I think of the most fun I got to do, as far as I would say put in your training and what you really think you're going to get out there and do. I didn't really have any combat deployments. But one of my favorite times flying the Osprey was down in the Philippines. And unfortunately, it was to do humanitarian assistance. But it was another demonstration of what the Osprey, brings to the playing field. And so we were operating the longest days I've gotten to fly. I think we were in the seat for 12 hours, logging a 11.0, and we were really delivering supplies, bags of rice, people back to a safer area after a big typhoon in the Philippines. And I still look at that as the most rewarding flying that I ever got to do in the aircraft, because not only were you putting this great tool to use, but it was going to immediate use, and you saw what that was. We stuck with the same crews every other day, so you were flying with the same guys. You didn't have to change over. You just got into a rhythm. So I think of that as the most rewarding flying that I got to do. And then really the HMX flying at the Presidential Squadron, was probably some of the most fun as far as getting across country the aircraft, out to Los Angeles and back, going to do lifts. Yeah, what I think, I'm looking at kind of a picture of it behind me here or in front of me on the wall. Is we were there in July of, I think it was 2020, when the president was out there on the 4th of July, or I think it was July 3rd when he was there. But, getting to fly in tight formation at low altitudes by Mount Rushmore, taking some really cool pictures, close to the 4th of July. I wanted to be home for the 4th of July, but you really couldn't beat that. So that's definitely a flight at that squadron that I'll always hold on to. It's kind of a once in a lifetime, super fun, super cool thing that most people wouldn't get the chance to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of something more American than flying an Osprey past Mount Rushmore. That's really cool. Transitioning kind of forward in your career, you spent time in Okinawa in Japan. And I've always been curious what it's like to live there. I'm a big ski fan, and Warren Miller, he produces ski films, and they've recorded a lot of film in Japan. Apparently, it has some of the world's best skiing. Not that it relates to the Osprey, but what was your experience like living in Okinawa, and how'd you like living out there?
It was the first time that I had lived, obviously that far away from home, but in an international setting, right? So that comes with all kinds of complete newness, understanding their culture, not only their culture, but all of Southeast Asia, places we got to visit and go. So immediate sense of adventure. It was a squadron that was in San Diego, and we kind of all moved out there at the same time to replace a 46 squadron. So it was great being out there with people that you already had established friendships with. Our squadron was the closest family type atmosphere in a squadron that I've had. We definitely used that to get ourselves through it. I was there for 2 years and really got to experience, the best sushi. Like it'll change your mind on sushi.
I bet.
Some of the coolest, some other really fun flying out there, flying over the water to mainland Japan. We flew the Ospreys with tankers to Thailand. I got to go all the way to Australia with tankers. So, I think the travel and the proximity to so many cool destinations is what I look back on as the best part, is that it's hard to find the time or the desire to maybe take as many trips as I crammed into 2 years of places and flying and things that I got to do out there. And then, and then also the training exercises, and then even the actual operational stuff like that typhoon relief thing. There hasn't been combat in that area in quite a while, and now it's become much more of a friendship, and we call it bilateral training. It's continuing the relationships between the countries and the allies out there, and really reinforcing that through training and shared capabilities. That was kind of the coolest part of being out there for sure.
Yeah, I would imagine the sushi, like you brought up, would be one of the best parts of the whole thing. I love sushi, but how different is the sushi there versus what you're getting like in San Diego?
There are San Diego places that can compete. Once I got back, I had to really seek them out. But if you're the initial, growing up in the Midwest, I wouldn't say my parents took me to a lot of sushi restaurants. It's got to get all the way to the middle of the country. But learning sushi and then going to really good, when it melts like butter is what I say, you found a good sushi place. If you find good tuna that melts in your mouth, you've found a good spot. So yeah, I've found a couple places comparable, but for the most part, it's pretty hard to beat everywhere you went.
Yeah, I bet. Tony, based on your reaction, I'm assuming you're not a fan of sushi.
I've had, I'm not even going to call it sushi, done the California roll, and it, had some avocado and everything in it. But not, I don't think I've ventured that far into it to know if I really truly like it or not. I still, I'll have to go with Ashley and Bobby and really have some real sushi to make that determination. I think I'm undecided at this point. What about you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm like Bobby. Growing up, my parents didn't eat sushi. We ate like 3 things, and sushi wasn't one of them. So I didn't like it only because I hadn't developed a taste for it for a long time. And then my uncle lived in Ventura, and he went fishing a lot, and he started bringing home shark. and he barbecued shark for me a couple times, and that was the first fish that I really had that was good. It was pretty mild, and it kind of just progressed from there. And my wife, she loves sushi, so just because of her love for sushi and fish, I started to develop a taste and a love for it on my own. Now I absolutely love it. Our kids, they're 12 and 13, and they love sushi too. So we'll be like, hey, where do you want to go to dinner? And when I was 12, 13 years old, I would not be caught dead in a sushi place, So it's pretty neat to see them, have a love for sushi. But man, what a cool experience you had in Japan. Going back to the Warren Miller thing, did you get to experience any skiing in Japan or any of the wintertime stuff?
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
So I did. The island I was on in Okinawa is pretty tropical. So that didn't have winters per se. But we did, a bunch of us took a trip up to Sapporo. I believe the ski place was Niseko. And it was some really good skiing. It was on an old volcano. Snow was coming down. And so just that one trip for a full weekend, we did get to go up way up to the northern island and find some good snow. Really good stuff.
Right on. Yeah, it's one of these days I go up there for some skiing and some sushi.
Oh, wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
Hey, before we get off the subject, I have a question for Bobby. We were talking about deployment over to Okinawa and just deployment in general. And I remember before your last deployment, we got to go on the, I believe it was the USS America, correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
And what struck me, not ever being on a ship like that or any ship in that manner, is the cramped quarters. Can you touch on being deployed out on the water, how tight the quarters are? Can it get confining? The dynamic of, I've heard stories, one guy gets sick, a lot of guys are going to get sick. Just the whole deployment and the living conditions on a ship like that, if you could.
I did several deployments aboard ship. At least that's where they started and finished. We've got to get off a few times along the way. But typically, like the one that you saw, Tony, it was a 7-month deployment on a MEU. So we call it Marine Expeditionary Unit. And that incorporates a squadron where an Osprey squadron is the base unit. And then we have other helicopters, CH-53s, the Cobras, the Hueys. It was Harriers, now still a little bit, and mostly F-35s. We all become one kind of mega squadron. And then you've got a battalion of infantry and then a logistics battalion. And we all bring, this mixed capability, and we go out for, upwards of 7 months. There's other training that we do before we go out that long. But typically it's 7 months. So you kind of, the date when you're leaving and the date you're coming home, they normally don't change. If anything, the coming home gets later, which luckily didn't happen to me really. But yeah, there's something like 3,000 of us on this boat. It's very similar size to a Navy aircraft carrier, for launching jets. Although we don't have any of the launching systems or the cable recovery stuff. Everything that lands on the LHD or LHD ships I was on has to be a vertical landing. So that's obviously why that mix of aircraft is the one that comes. But with all those people on there and all those planes on there, just like Tony got to see, it can be pretty cramped quarters. And I really don't have too much room to talk because they got a lot smaller than what you saw, Tony. For the pilots and the officers on board, we're spoiled with our room. We have a room with a sink and a couple of bunk beds, and you can close your door and get a little bit of privacy. But the enlisted Marines, who are really the ones cranking out the majority of the work, they're the ones turning wrenches, and keeping the ins and outs of that ship and that squadron going. They're in much bigger, we refer to them almost as like a squad bay. They might be stacked 3 high or more, with much less privacy even than what we got. So there's definitely kind of a hierarchy and a method to the madness. It makes you, very thankful when you do get back to your bed in your own room sometimes. But, there was times, there was one of the deployments I was on where, I was like 3 levels away from my bed on the boat. We had gone ashore and you kind of took your sleeping system and your pack and you had a bunk bed in a tent on shore. And then we went on another deck even further and you were down to basically a backpack and a sleeping bag for a few days, so at times it would go 3 levels away. By the time you made it back to the ship in a warm shower in your own bed, that was pretty good living. It gives you some good perspective on then how excited we were to get home and have your own apartment.
Yeah, John, he, when he took me on and when he was loading his gear for his deployment, and, I got to see where the officers live, and it was a smaller area. I thought even that was a small area, and I believe there was 4 of you in there. And I commented on, oh, this is pretty tight. Well, I guess it's not tight on a ship. And then he took me over to where the guys that were doing the work and, not holding the rank they have. And I looked at those sleeping quarters and I went, you have got to be kidding me. I mean, they're just stacked, and I don't know if they hot caught, but it was pretty amazing to see that. Oh, wow, that would get very confining real quick.
Yeah, it definitely did. There was times that the 7 months felt long.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine.
One of our recent episodes, we talked to wingman med guys, and they both were naval pilots flying F-18s, and now they're flight surgeons, and both had the opportunity to kind of compare and contrast their experiences living on carrier and their different roles that they had throughout their career. We talked about how, if you want to show a kid which path to take when it comes to education and the things you choose to do in life, take them aboard a ship. And it's like, hey, if you go to the officer route, this is where you get to live. If you don't, if you're enlisted, this is where you live. And I think it's pretty clear at that point, which path you want to go down, We talked about your time in Japan. I'd kind of like to fast forward now, just based on our time. I can keep you here probably till midnight asking you all kinds of questions and things, just because I'm so enamored by the aircraft and your career. But I really want to talk about your time working in Washington, D.C. as part of HMX-1. Can you lead off by just talking about what the selection process was like to get there? Once you identified, this is something I want to do, how did you make that a reality?
Absolutely. So kind of the way that I first experienced the squadron and what it does is on certain international trips where they don't take the actual Ospreys assigned to the unit, they'll assign another unit to support in that role. So while I was on deployment, there was 2 different occurrences of when Obama went to Kenya, and then also when he went to the Philippines, where my squadron was tasked to support with the 3 Ospreys. So from there, we were essentially doing that mission, but we had somebody else in the Osprey in the jump seat, kind of helping us with the coordination piece of what our role was. So I got to initially see it from the fleet perspective before I was selected. And I realized it was a pretty prestigious place to go. And I had some friends of mine that were, peers or a little senior to me that were also assigned to the squadron. So it's a board selected process. You've got to fill out an application, and for obvious reasons, eligibility for the security clearance is a very big part of that. You have to have a very high clearance, so a pretty clean record in order to be in the squadron and around the places and types of information that we were exposed to. So you apply on the board, and another unique part is there's a selection board at the squadron that's really made up kind of mostly by the members of the squadron. So it was a lot of your previous reputation. Is this somebody that not only do I want to fly with, but I want to travel with? You had your professional record of what your your training, what your qualifications were, what your deployments were, kind of all those things combined, led to your selection to the squadron. It's only normally, I want to say, about 8 guys for us on the Osprey side. It was about 8 of us each year got selected to go, and that was a 3-year tour. Once you're there as an Osprey pilot, it was pretty easy to just get started. There was no real operational differences in the aircraft, just a little bit nicer, obviously the nicer paint. We had a little bit higher priority for maintenance parts and things like that, just based on the nature of the mission. So you're flying, some of the best Ospreys that the Marine Corps has, doing a very important mission, supporting the travel of the president. And, a lot of very unique experiences, and kind of peek behind the curtain in the 3 years I was there.
I feel like that the peer part of the selection process is probably one of the most effective ways of selecting people. And we talk about the selection process a lot for our units, our aviation units. And it seems like the units that can implement that type of selection process into their program, it makes it more, it's a more efficient, more effective program. Because like you said, you're going to be in tight quarters with these folks for a long time, and you want to make sure that the people that you're letting in are, they believe in the same things that you do, and foster this culture that makes you efficient, effective. So that's awesome. I'd love to see that it's like that even in the federal government, where I feel like a lot of times in the federal government, there's so much red tape and bureaucracy. Those things get cut out. So it's neat to see that that's still in place, especially when you're talking about the president. You talk about the parts, and I can imagine, even for like the mechanics, you're getting probably the best mechanics that are putting in to work on that aircraft. So, that's really cool. When it comes to flying, you said it's pretty much the same, just a little bit of a different paint job. Obviously, your missions are different. Can you talk about some of the missions that you were a part of that were pretty awesome?
Most of the time, when you see the Osprey in that role, I can describe the Los Angeles trips pretty easy. When the president travels out there, they typically fly into LAX airport, and then they're not going to drive in all the California traffic, right? This is the way that you guys can know what a presidential motorcade would do to traffic out there already. And so typically, for several different reasons, we'll fly him. And in that role, the Osprey would be a flight of 5 aircraft that you'll see in SoCal sometimes. And so the Ospreys are in this support role. We're typically carrying staff and press and various members of the entourage that are always traveling with the president. And it was at times a very busy schedule, especially pre-COVID. That slowed us down a little bit. That changed my time at HMX. But for the most part, anywhere that the president was going, there was typically some sort of an aviation capability there, whether it was, what you saw, all 5 aircraft providing lift. And so we were at times, we'd have to have people in more than one place at once in order to provide that capability, maybe on consecutive days, say during the election cycle is a good example. When they are on the road for days at a time in different places, there was times that we would have to have that capability, in multiple locations, even with the Ospreys.
In your time there, any personal interaction with any of the presidents that served in your term?
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned air medical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completions Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs, including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Typically, I was the closest to them. When I wasn't flying, so my kind of a secondary role there was I was a White House liaison officer. So I assisted in the planning of the trips, picking out and ensuring the safety of the landing zones, clearances, sometimes pretty tight areas, parks in the middle of a city, places like that. And so I would, act as kind of an LZ control officer. And doing that job, I was plain clothes in a suit, with an earpiece with comms directly to the pilots. So I would typically be very close to the helicopter as both President Trump and later President Biden coming on and off, wherever they were going. There was one interaction I had with President Trump when I first got to Washington, D.C., where I got to watch a South Lawn landing from the South Lawn viewing pen there, very close to kind of where the press are set up. And in that interaction, the president normally would come out and kind of greet all the visitors and say hi to what's going on. We were standing close to the family of, it was the pilot flying that day. It was his last flight. So his parents got to experience all of this, and had the opportunity to shake President Trump's hand for just a second while he kind of greeted everybody that was there that day. And then typically our interactions in more of a work environment, when I was around the helicopter, you didn't have a personal interaction with them as he was going by, but definitely pretty close proximity quite often. It was very cool, to be that close to the action, I guess I'd say.
Talk about when they're flying. A lot of times you look around and you're like, holy cow, I'm getting paid to do this. And, for you and that the South Lawn, you're in a position where most people don't get to be, let alone fly into. And here you are in both of those roles. Do you just pinch yourself half the time when you're out there?
Yeah, it was definitely cool, especially, we got to, I wouldn't say, intentionally, break any regulations, but, I'd be lying if we didn't get to go really fast, really low, if we were trying to get in front of him and make sure that we had the press dropped off first, to film his landing somewhere. So I got to do some really cool flying, up the Hudson River, when we'd go to the Wall Street pad. Everything was rehearsed. We were within a TFR, all of the air traffic control was fully briefed, and it was pretty cool to be able to take off, for instance, out of JFK and just say you're executing as briefed and proceed with a plan that was known, rehearsed, and so well thought out that you could do all those things without really having to talk to anybody.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I think back to my early days when I was training at my private. I wish I could have said that to the tower. I'm going to proceed as briefed, instead of having to trip over my words 1,000 times. Of all of course, that's a super serious role that you're in, transporting the world's most powerful man around the world. But I'd imagine there's some funny things that are mixed in the bunch there. Anything that you can think of that was funny during your time in that role?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, kind of like you're saying, we had to be, pretty on point and make sure, these rehearsals really worked everything out. When I think of some things, it's probably typically during the rehearsal that something would get found out. I forget where we were at. We were somewhere in Florida, and it's almost like the YouTube videos you've seen of when people experience the Osprey downwash for the first time, and so we had guys doing the job I just described, where they were in the zone, calling us down and making sure we were landing on the right spots and had appropriate clearances. And we had somebody that was newer at that job who was not an Osprey pilot, and so they were in an area they thought was okay, and they call it a tornado machine or whatever, the weird nicknames for it, but I think she got picked up and moved through a fence at a horse track further than we noticed. The fence didn't hold together very well at all before and after she went through it. And so it was one of those things where, I don't think they ever sent the squadron a bill for the fence. But we were always keenly aware of what we maybe were or were not gonna damage going in. It was a real concern for us, but at times, sometimes, luckily no one was ever injured. But definitely a learning experience of too close to the downwash. I've done it myself.
Yeah, no kidding. You talked about being busy. Imagine every day you come in and there's a different set of expectations based on whatever's happening in the world. You talk about what that was like, what the operational tempo was like. And again, just kind of one of those things that seems like you don't know what you're getting into each day.
Sometimes it was slower than others. Obviously, a time that I would describe it as the highest was during an election season, where we would sometimes go on the road and just go trip to trip, where you'd go set up a trip or execute a trip and you'd just go straight to the next one without even getting to go home. So obviously, President of the United States has a very big, important, and dynamic job. And with that, so was their schedule. And, all of the planning and preparations that we needed to do for each trip and each location, resulted in a lot of travel and being very flexible at home. In some ways, it was good preparation, for my job as an airline pilot now, in that it was typically 3 or 4 days home. Then maybe you were home for 5 days a week, maybe a little longer. But then you might have plans, and the best example is Ashley's birthday one year with Chris Stapleton concert tickets. And, I couldn't really say no to the trip that they said I was going on. So she was understanding of that. She knew that, the job that I was doing, was very important, and I couldn't turn it down. But you learn to be flexible with your schedule, enjoy your days off, knowing that the day would come very quickly that you'd, be going somewhere either inside or outside the country. Sometimes, we did some international. The international stuff was slow during COVID, but it was really cool to be in a place where you knew you were going to constantly get, go to a new location, have a different experience, fly somewhere new. It was the first time I got to see a lot of corners of the country, even after, what we talked about with all the flight school places and places that I've lived. It showed me a lot more of the country and other places in the world. And it's very cool time
Yeah,
there.
I can only imagine, of all the places you went and all the missions you were part of as part of HMX-1, what would you say is your kind of most memorable or your favorite mission that you were part of?
We kind of talked about it earlier with, the one of the picture flying by Mount Rushmore just before the 4th of July with Trump is the one that comes quickly to mind, and then really my last trip going to Brussels, I got to do an international trip in the planning role as the liaison. Was a really fun trip. The international trips were great because it took a little bit more planning. So you got to be in those locations a little bit longer. Not only Brussels, I've got good friends in London now that worked with the London Metro that there were pilots out there. So it established some friendships outside of the country as well, guys that I still talk to. So that, really the London stuff, I got to be on the South Lawn of Buckingham Palace for a couple of landings. The kinds of opportunities that, most people don't get to, help escort the Queen's geese back into the pond before the helicopter lands. But, those kinds of things kind of became commonplace sometimes of just random things. You stop and thought about what you're actually doing. Very cool, great experiences and great memories.
Wow, how cool! Yeah, I think all those experiences, if you were to transport yourself back to 6-year-old Bobby, those are the things that you could never imagine you get a chance to do, and here you are. You did it, and that's really cool. Really neat to hear about, not just your experience as a pilot, but being a part of HMX-1. You started talking about your transition to civilian life, being a pilot. We talk a lot about that in the podcast. It's something that every service member is going to face at some point. And as pilots, there's a lot of different opportunities that await you in post military life. We had Eric Sabison on the podcast a while back, and he was, a big part of RTAG, founded RTAG, and really interesting perspective on that. What's your perspective on that transition from military to civilian life?
It was a tough transition, after being active duty for 13 years plus, that kind of becomes a way of life and what you're used to. I could see the opportunity on the outside, and I knew that the time was coming, and especially the way that the airlines are hiring, the growth that they're experiencing, especially post-COVID, that my timing to me personally felt right to jump out and go pursue that and kind of whatever that took. I joke around that, after making the decision, it's that day that you go in and you kind of sign the papers that says you're done. I kind of describe it as breaking up with a girlfriend. It's an interesting analogy, but it was almost like that single freedom again that you may not have experienced in a long time. That all of a sudden I got to go try different jobs and look into different, I interviewed some places, I applied some places, and you start to see the opportunities that are out there that most flying, especially military flying, the experiences I've learned now are very different from other people's. Whether it's general aviation or corporate aviation, we all bring different experiences that very much have applications outside of what we're used to.
What would your advice be to someone who's maybe a couple years out to start prepping themselves, or maybe it's more than a couple years out, but to start prepping themselves to fly in civilian life?
There's some good books out there. I'm sure you could Google and find them. But if you even have the idea that you think you want to, take the time to get your ratings that you need to prioritize, from the research that I did, you start to look at where you want to live. That was a big one for me. I was living on the East Coast and the West Coast. And for me, it was a big choice of, I wanted to go back closer to the Midwest where I had grown up. So you kind of just look at the opportunities that are out there of where do you want to live? What do you want to fly? What things can you do now? The more things that you can do further out, kind of check those little boxes, the easier it will make that first day to get out. The guys that wait to do it till the last second, you can still be successful, but there may be a little bit of a longer gap between getting that next job. For me, I started almost 2 years out. I got my ATP February of 2020. And, I guess it was 18 months later that I found myself waiting on an email or a phone call. But in that time, it was getting your FAA ratings, doing the interview prep, I think is great. There's some really great services out there right now to do interview prep, to review your applications, to get your logbooks straight. It's really the administrative stuff that's tough, that the military you don't worry about in the military that necessarily. They keep track of all that, but as many ducks in a row as you can get before you make that jump, I think it gave me a lot more confidence walking out, knowing that for the most part, I had done everything I could to put myself on the market.
Would you say 2 years is kind of about the sweet spot for that prep time?
You protect and defend. So do we. Astronautics' proven cybersecurity, connectivity, and upgrade solutions support helicopter OEMs and operators worldwide. When the mission matters, you need to trust that your avionics systems are secure, connected, and reliable, because lives depend on it. Continue to protect and defend. So will we. Contact Astronautics at www.astronautics.com.
I really think so. I know guys that have waited longer, but I think not only from prepping from a financial standpoint for some unknown times, but in taking the time to explore the different options was really important for me. Where I thought I was going to go and where I ended up, even in that amount of time, was very different. And it was, from listening to experiences of my peers, from things that went my way and things that didn't go my way. That's a reality of it too. That's very hard, is that, your application it's all the same content, but different companies look at things differently. There's different criteria at many of these companies. Just to stick with it. We encourage guys that I know getting out to apply to as many places as you can. And kind of what I did was, you continue to compare your options, and every time you get a better one, especially the first few years, just keep going, keep selecting the next thing between the two that you want. I think it'll feel right when you kind of landed in the right spot. somewhere that you could stay for a really long time.
Yeah, I can see what you mean about it being difficult. I recently medically retired from the police department and went through that transition myself, and I feel like my transition was smooth. I had luckily I have a role to fall back into, which has been really awesome with MHM and doing the podcast with them. But this is a part of a bigger conversation that a lot of our folks are facing. You get to the end of your career, 50 years old used to be the age where people could retire and start something new. You get to the end of that time and you've got a lot of experience to share. Well, what do you do with that time and experience you've got now? So I'm looking forward to having some conversations on the podcast as we go forward that talks about that. It encourages guys to go and do something to feed back into our industry and our community after they leave their jobs at the police department or the fire department or wherever it is they're flying, because they just have so much experience and knowledge to share. So cool that you had the foresight 2 years out to start working on that and prepping yourself to get where you are now. Can you talk about that a little bit, what you're doing now and what your experience has been?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm actually coming up on the 2-year mark here. I was offered, applied, through all these services I was talking about, prepared for an application with several of the major airlines. And I got an interview at United Airlines back in February of 2022. The interview went well, and I started training with them in March of 2022, and learned that I was going to be flying the 737. I was initially still living out in the DC area, so I was able to bid and be based there in Washington, DC. A little bit of a wait for training and the way things were going. So I didn't actually start flying for a couple months as they got everybody through the simulator and initial flight training, but then was able to bid to be Chicago based. And me and Ashley now live up in Wisconsin. There's about an hour drive to Chicago, which is really a sweet spot for me because it gets me out of the city life, out of the suburbs, the traffic, some of the congestion, and back to a kind of small town living the way that I grew up. And typically my monthly schedule right now, and it's a little bit different depending on your seniority level and how quick things go, but I'm flying about 4 trips a month. I'm still in the Marine Corps Reserve, still get to go fly the Osprey a little bit out in San Diego. So I can pepper that into my schedule, which is a great flexibility tool. The other transition that I do highly encourage from guys leaving active duty anyways, is that the reserves has really been a great landing spot for me as far as not completely walking away, to still have that camaraderie in the ready room, still get to go put on a flight suit from time to time, still be part of the greater purpose. So being able to do that at the same time, starting, this great new adventure flying, I didn't have any fixed wing jet time before getting here. The training program was about a month of sim training. Once again, that puts you in a great spot to get in the plane, for the first time and go see now how, maybe it's not the exact skills of the physically flying the Osprey that got me here, but, it was absolutely the aircraft commander skills, the experiences along the way that I think will greatly benefit, what I'm doing now. And I've seen that in the first 2 years that I've been doing it. Certain things that translate really, really well into this line of work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tony, anything to touch on as far as the transition, either from military to civilian or like law enforcement to civilian before we move on?
Well, it was just, it's been pretty cool. We're both aviators. We obviously hit it off the first time we met each other. We have great conversations along his whole journey. And it's been cool to sit back and watch how his career has progressed, and even up to the point of transitioning over to commercial aviation in the airlines and seeing how that's all played out. It's going to be awesome to see how it progresses from there. How much longer do you got till you get to your 20, Bobby?
I'm still working on, I've got about 4 more years in the reserves to hit that 20-year mark. Whether that will all be flying the Osprey or doing another job, there's a lot of other unique non-flying jobs in the reserves that I've found as well. So there will still be that balance for a few more years, while continuing to kind of to grow and see what other opportunities that I've got here flying.
It's been awesome just sitting back watching it all just play out, going from the Marine Corps HMX and now into the airlines. So I'm hoping it still progresses well for you and you make it to the top spot that you're shooting for there with the airlines. It's going to be a fun adventure.
Absolutely. It's very exciting times with all the hiring and all the opportunities in the airlines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's hiring and there's lots of movement. That's great. Last thing I'd like to ask you, since you had this experience as a kid and you've gone through so many different roles as a pilot, for those, what advice do you have for those that are kind of just starting their path, that they want to become pilots but maybe don't know where to start or what things to focus on? What's your advice for them?
It's a great question, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I definitely think, however you get that first foot in the door is the best way to show people, what's out there, whether that's taking a kid on an airplane ride or just taking somebody to the airport, or the interactions that I've had at an air show, the excitement, that initial excitement, and then not letting it die out. If you go take a flight lesson, if you go just get one rating, I think you'll quickly learn if that's something that you want to continue on. And kind of like I said, the idea of being an airline pilot, thinking all the way back to when I was 17, seemed like a lifetime away. And really all that you can do is focus on the next little step. You focus on the things in your control. Whether that's saving money for your next rating, whether that's getting your next rating, whether that's accepting a scholarship or going to a certain school. And then I think also, when things don't go your way, of still just staying on that path. We've been talking about the Osprey that I love, and I'm the first one to admit that it wasn't my first choice. I didn't know what airline I was going to fly for or what my job was going to be after active duty. And this isn't where I expected I'd be, but I quickly learned that it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. So I think it's about taking the little steps along the way, and whether it's a straight path or a curvy path, that as long as you're moving forward and building hours in any way that you can, I think you'll be surprised that along the way, the doors that each one of those things opens up.
Yeah. Yeah. I love a ton of what you said. And, through all these conversations and stories that have been told in the podcast about the paths that have been taken to get to where they wanted to get, the one thing that's common among all the conversations is that there's adversity that everybody faced to get to where they want to get. So you talked about when someone says no, what's your response? You're going to be told no. You're going to come across things that get you down and deter you from wanting to progress. And I love what you said there. Don't let that alter your plans. Just keep pushing forward, one step at a time. Control the things that are controllable for you, and I think that's really sound advice. Tony, for you, any advice for people in that same position?
I think you and I have talked about it on some of the other podcasts that one of the biggest, let's just go with law enforcement aviation, getting into a small aviation unit when, you and I have been there, there's one opening and there's 25 guys competing for it. Is there a chance that you're not going to get that position the first, second, or third time? Yeah. But like Bobby just said, keep moving forward, keep trying, don't give up. And you hear the don't give up thing all the time, and it's kind of a cliche, but it's true. If you are focused and you want that job bad enough, you're going to find a way to get it. So the guys, for our department, when they're asking me and they're coming up through they're just in patrol a couple of years, hey, how do I get to your air unit? And I'll tell them the first place it starts is right there in patrol and developing a good reputation. Your reputation is what's going to make you when you progress through the department. You have a great reputation and a good work ethic, pretty much things are going to happen for you. If it's on the flip side, bad reputation, you're a slug, probably not going to go very many places, especially a small unit like a aviation unit or a SWAT team. So we know that's how that works. I still give that type of advice, and it's up to them to take it. And it depends on how motivated they are to get to that job that they really want.
Yeah, 100% agree with that as well. No is going to be something to hear for sure, because like you said, there's a lot of people competing for a small number of spots. So, well, Bobby, thank you for taking the time out of your day. It's been a long and busy day for you to join us, to share your story and to motivate not only the next generation of aviators, but the folks in our industry to just, I don't know, hearing your story is inspirational. So thank you for sharing it. And hopefully we can catch up when you come out to Miramar one of these days at North Park Brewing or Viewpoint Brewing or one of these epic places in San Diego for a beer.
Absolutely. That sounds great. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I will make that happen. And thanks for coming on the podcast with us, Bobby. That was really good info. And I know John and I are aviators, but I think most of our listeners are going to enjoy hearing about your journey and how you got where you were going, especially HMX and how you transitioned to the airlines. All great information. And again, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, man, it's been fun. Well, I guess it's a good spot to cut it. And so on that, we'll catch you guys later.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys.
See ya. This is the end of the 2-part series and conversation with Bobby Swartz. Stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support. Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned air medical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completions Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs, including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors. You protect and defend. So do we. Astronautics' proven cybersecurity, connectivity, and upgrade solutions support helicopter OEMs and operators worldwide. When the mission matters, you need to trust that your avionics systems are secure, connected, and reliable because lives depend on it. Continue to protect and defend. So will we. Contact Astronautics at www.astronautics.com.
Thank you for hanging out to hear from our sponsors who make these conversations possible. This was an awesome conversation highlighting the Marine Corps Ospreys, but I do want to highlight one of the nonprofit organizations we've partnered with and support, which is the Battalion Blue Skies Foundation, that provides post-mishap support for the Army aviation community and its families. The Blue Skies Foundation is part of Battalion, who makes apparel for aviators by aviators. They created a Battalion Hangar Z collaboration line of shirts. They can be found at www.battalion.com. 100% of the Hangar Z proceeds from the sale of the shirts go back to the Battalion Blue Skies Foundation, so be sure to check it out.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.